Welcome everyone, Costini here with a discussion about Realms of Chaos for Total War Warhammer 3. In the recent blog on the subject of patch 4.2 and the changes they are going to bring to the game, as well as their DLC plans in general, Creative Assembly has mentioned that they are going to develop content for Realms of Chaos going forward. Personally, I think this is a significant waste of time, and beyond the fact that it's a waste of time, if they're developing content for Realms of Chaos, they are probably making decisions with regards to the content based on the Realms of Chaos map. I certainly hope that isn't the case, because Realms of Chaos is just such a poor map that any kind of legendary lord, any kind of campaign, any kind of racial changes made for this map would just not result in great gameplay. That is my personal perspective on the subject. I'm not saying Realms of Chaos couldn't be improved. In point of fact, I would very much like for a smaller scale map, but if you look at this map compared to the Warhammer 1 map, compared to the Warhammer 2 map, it is a joke of a map that just wasn't designed all that well. But these decisions that Creative Assembly made with respect to Realms of Chaos have certainly had a major impact on the races developed for this map in general. And for every race and DLC that has come out since then, the situation for Realms of Chaos is just not really that great. No campaign except one, Ostankias specifically, works very well within the context of Realms of Chaos. The reason they don't work very well is because of the specifics of how Realms of Chaos was designed and for what it was designed for. Realms of Chaos was designed to facilitate a narrative experience with regards to the Realms of Chaos themselves. So the way this particular map works, well, let's consider the situation that we have over here. Within 30 turns of this campaign, 32 or so turns of this campaign, the portals will open, and the Realms of Chaos will become available. Once you enter the Realms of Chaos, you spend about 10 turns or so going after a particular soul. And you do this every 30 turns. So every 30 turns, you have to take your main army to go on a chase for a soul. Now, the chase is not necessarily that difficult. It is just very time consuming with regards to how it plays out. Not really a great campaign dynamic to begin with, to deal with as a player. That's the first point. But there is more on top of this. Oh yes, there is significantly more on top of that particular aspect. See, when you look at the Realms of Chaos map, it's not just like, oh, you're going 10 turns to deal with the rifts. No. You're also having to spend resources in other parts of your empire to deal with the rifts that have been created. And when you do get out of the Realms of Chaos themselves, you also have to spend time getting rid of the negative trait, which you would most certainly gain in the vast majority of campaigns. All of this together is what creates a bad map. Plain and simple, all of these features, quote unquote, combined create a very bad map experience. But that's just the start of it all. You then have to add to that particular fact the reality that a lot of these races, a lot of these legendary lords designed for the Realms of Chaos map are limited. So you look at Kislev, just the perfect example. Kastaltan doesn't even start with a provincial capital. He has to gain one. So he has to go at war with Erengrad, which isn't necessarily an ideal situation for him to do, simply because if he does do it, he's going to lose devotion, which is not really a great dynamic for him to be dealing with during the course of his campaign. I mean, you can make it work, don't get me wrong. I'm not arguing otherwise. What I am simply saying, however, with respect to all of this, is it ends up being a significant waste of time. Like, just because you can win a campaign, you can certainly win all of the campaigns that were designed for Realms of Chaos. Just because you can win a campaign does not make that campaign in any way, shape, or form well designed. In point of fact, they're quite very poorly designed. with respect to how a campaign plays out. You have limited economies for these races, in particular. Kislev's economic potential, their base economic structure generates 100 for 1,000. That is not at all a good trade-off. So it means your base economic structure is going to take 10 turns to recoup its cost. And then you look at the higher and higher tiers with merchant traders, with trade quorum. It just takes a very, very substantial amount of time to be able to recover the cost of the structures that you're building. And this applies to virtually every race except Kebie in Realms of Chaos. But that's only part of it. Then you have to consider the campaign dynamics themselves. Beyond the fact that you have a very limited economy for all of these races, which still very much remains the case to this very day, but beyond that particular aspect, you also have other problems as well in a campaign situation. So what are those other problems? Well, consider Kastaltin's situation. You do want to gain control of a Kislev city very, very quickly during the course of his campaign. It is simply the best possible decision you can make. So you're having to fight a war on multiple fronts. That is the start of his campaign, with very limited resources. See, Realms of Chaos campaigns are not difficult because the opponents you're dealing are in any way, shape, or form difficult foes to defeat. They are not. In point of fact, quite the opposite. For the most part in Realms of Chaos, you will be spending a lot of time, even right now with all the Legendary Lords that they've added through Champions of Chaos, Chaos Dwarves, and Shadows of Change, even with all of that, the majority of opponents you're going to be dealing with in a campaign like this are going to be minor factions that are going to try and stand in your way. And that is what you are dealing with during the course of a campaign like this, which isn't really a great dynamic to tackle during any particular campaign. But a campaign like this, just having to find minor opponents constantly throughout the course of your campaign, is not really a good gameplay dynamic from where I'm standing on the subject. We go even further on the subject. You fight minor opponents, but you fight a lot of these minor opponents. You fight faction after faction after faction, and because of the AI cheats, this is all legendary, because of the AI cheats, each of these minor factions is certainly going to produce at least a full stack. But because you're fighting 4 factions, potentially, like Kastaltin, he starts a war with a minor Kislev faction, then he has Strong, then he has Hellpit, now he has Village. If he didn't have Village, he'd have more Northlands and the Neiman Prince. You do just end up having to deal with a significant number of opponents, minor opponents as during the course of your campaign. That is the campaign dynamic that you've got in play over here. That is what you're going to be dealing with throughout the course of your campaign. And again, it is not really a great dynamic to be dealing with in any way, shape, or form. In point of fact, it is quite an awful dynamic because you're limited by the resources, you're limited by the fact that, well, if you don't take a lot of territory and main multiple armies within those first 30 turns, you're just going to flat out end up losing the campaign that you are playing. That is the situation that you have to deal with as a player from the very beginning of your campaign. You're on that 30-minute clock, and you are also dealing with all these minor factions, and the more you expand, like as Kislev, the more you go into Norska, into the Chaos Waste, the more you encounter faction after faction after faction that is just going to attack you. This does happen rather frequently, in point of fact. So this keeps happening during the course of a campaign, and then you get to that 30th turn mark, you start getting the rifts. The rifts actually help you far more than they are a downside. The reason they quote-unquote help you is because the rifts, what they're going to do is they're going to hurt the AI factions just as much. And that's really the problem that gets created here. So early on, you've got this insane situation where you've got a lot of these minor factions to deal with, but you do overcome that particular dynamic in a campaign rather quickly. And once you do overcome that particular dynamic, you end up dealing with the rifts. You end up spending time you end up spending a significant amount of time in a campaign map where you end up spending a significant amount of time in a campaign map where you're just constantly dealing with rift demons. You're constantly dealing with wasting your army away, so to speak, going into the realms of chaos, getting souls with your main army, your most powerful army, that is, during the course of your campaign. And that is how you play a campaign over here in the realms of chaos. A waste of time after another waste of time. That is how a realms of chaos campaign is played. It isn't a particularly great dynamic, I would argue. In point of fact, I would dare say that it's a pretty awful campaign dynamic for anyone to actually be dealing with. But what's the problem with regards to DLC, you might ask? Well, because the map is designed around the idea of you fighting multiple minor factions within 30 turns, and after those 30 turns you have to constantly deal with the rifts, the moment you change anything with respect to any of that is the moment the whole thing falls apart. And that's exactly what happens with DLC, because with every DLC in this game, what they've done is they've removed the realms of chaos. So you don't have to deal with it in the Champions of Chaos campaign. You don't have to deal with it in Shadows Change. You don't have to deal with it in the Chaos Dwarf campaign. That's what has changed, really. But without the rifts holding you in check, without that limitation on your campaign, you suddenly realize that, well, you know, if I don't have to rush for a campaign victory within the first 30 turns, then I don't have to be this crazy maniac running all over the place trying to get done as much done as possible within that early game situation. And suddenly, just because of that one change, campaigns become a cakewalk. Furthermore, the limited economy that is available on a baseline level, though to be sure, Champions of Chaos do still generate less money than they should, but the limited economy that was in play early on is no longer in play when we're talking about the DLCs. Though it still does exist. Like, Ostanka is still awful, but simply because they did nothing to fix any of the Kislev issues, any of the inherent issues that Kislev does have during the course of a campaign. Also over here, apparently Frot has decided that he's going to eliminate me. So this is why DLCs don't work, because if any DLC was designed with the kind of poor economy that we see with Kislev, with ogres, with demons, it would obviously create a huge amount of controversy among the player base, for all the right reasons, I would add. It would create a huge amount of controversy among the player base, and so Creative Assembly does design things differently. With Warriors of Chaos, they still have some limitations on their economy, significant limitations, but they make it work simply because, well, they have vassals, and they have a lot of diplomatic potential that isn't necessarily present for the races in the game by default, like Katrin, Castalton, the demons, and so on and so forth. They're surrounded by factions that do dislike them. You play a campaign as Scrag, you're fighting the entire empire in that campaign, for instance. Just an example. And this does happen quite a lot during the course of these campaigns. But you take those elements away, you don't have factions surrounded by foes, with exception of like Astankia. You don't have DLC factions surrounded by foes that are constantly going to declare war on them. They don't have the economic limitations. They don't have the clock ticking from turn 1 of their campaigns. Suddenly, it all comes crashing down in a very quick succession. It's not just one thing; it's the combination of things leading to this situation that we now deal with during the course of campaigns in Warhammer 3. And again, not really a great dynamic, but it's created a situation where this map itself is just meaningless in every way that counts. It's not a great campaign dynamic. It's not a great campaign. It's not going to give you good gameplay. And unless they change the map, it's always going to be an awful gameplay style that we end up having to deal with during the course of a campaign over here. Now, one of the problems is climate, and the terrain in general. So you look at the Empire. The Empire is a joke over here in this map. Like, you look how it's all crushed together. And keep in mind, campaigns are meant to be played in the Empire. We have at least one campaign, Scrag's campaign, that's going to take place almost entirely in the Empire. It's not really good terrain. Kislev only has one extra province compared to Immortal Empires. And they don't even have more territory right now. It used to, but Kislev in Realms of Chaos is not significantly larger than Immortal Empires. You consider the difference between, and the distances, while somewhat greater, they're not necessarily that greater compared to the distances we do have to deal with in Immortal Empires. Depends on the area we're talking about. So basically, what I'm talking about, a lot of these areas are actually smaller than Immortal Empires. The Empire is smaller, the Dark Clans are smaller, the mountains are smaller for the most part. A lot of Kebie is significantly smaller. Like, Kebie is easily one of the worst areas in Realms of Chaos, but it's one of the best campaign areas in Immortal Empires. Now, I'm not saying that we can't have a more limited campaign. But you play the Vortex map, you play through that map, you realize, well, it's just a bigger map of what we get in Mortal Empires. Here, the map, like, the way they designed this map in particular just ends up being an utter disaster in every single way that does count. I'm not sure what CA was thinking with respect to this, but clearly the design of this particular map is just not really that good. Or they were designing a campaign around the idea, instead of thinking of designing a campaign for, a lot of DLCs, for a lot of content, they were designing a campaign purely focused on the idea of Realms of Chaos and going for the Souls Hunt. But that's not what the Vortex map did. The Vortex map, sure, you had the race, but it wasn't the only thing that you were dealing with during the course of that campaign. Quite the opposite. There were plenty of ways to play a campaign in the Vortex campaign map and achieve success in various ways. Whereas over here, it's all about the souls. The map is designed for souls, and the way the races are designed is just having a limited economy, having a limited campaign in general that is not really good. Like, look at how many factions I've already fought here. Now, don't get me wrong, you do fight plenty of factions in Immortal Empires. The difference in Immortal Empires with the new races is the races that we got from Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2, they have much better economies. They can maintain a lot of armies very quickly. They have better campaign dynamics. They don't have to deal with the souls. That is the very significant difference that we have in play
Let's hear what you have to say.
over there that we do have in play over there compared to here. So either Creative Assembly designs limited races for this particular map, or what Creative Assembly can do, and really should do, is redesign the map. They probably won't, but then the question is has to be asked, what's the value in adding content for this particular map? What is the inherent value of this? It doesn't seem to me that there is any particular value to adding content on this map at all, and it's just something that CA is has a contract for, so they have to do it. Also, I imagine, personally, my personal perspective on this, the way I imagine things on the subject is that the reason they keep designing content for this particular map has to do with the fact that if they didn't, people would complain, and people would be like, oh, you're cutting features from the game. Personally, I think that they shouldn't bother at all, unless they're willing to redesign the map to work better with new races. That is my personal perspective on the subject. Let me know what you guys think. Quastin signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And stay tuned for more.